Afternoon and welcome to the Senate Subcommittee of Finance and Appropriations related to transportation. If we could have the committee introduce themselves, Senator Newman.
You did it.
There you go. And one of the finest chairmen I ever served under when he was head of the regular transportation committee, which I now chair. Senator Barker will probably be along shortly. So let's just get started with the agenda. We have here, speaking about port performance and supply chain updates, Stephen Edwards, Executive Director and CEO of the Port of Virginia. We had breakfast together here back during the Transportation Joint Committee meeting that we had with the House back, I guess a couple months ago. At any rate, so Stephen, welcome. Have a seat at the table here and tell us about all things ports.
So thank you, Chairman and Senator. And thank you for inviting me. I'll follow through on the slide deck what we have to cover.
There you go. Here, just talk into that so that
we get the recording. So and I thought just as an agenda for today, and in particular because we do have a budget item related to the port expansion, I wanted to make sure we got to that position as well as how the port is performing. So what I hope to cover for the agenda today is just a quick reminder of what we have been doing with the port layout, in particular between the various components of the port and how it's operating, condition of the supply chain in calendar year 2021 and how we performed within it, what we see as strategically as the opportunities and risks facing the port, are we prepared for those risks, talk about NIT Norfolk International Terminal North optimization, which is in particular the ask that is in the budget, cover the offshore wind hub at Portsmouth Marine Terminal, and then just talk about the port economic impact. So to cover the port layout, this is an aerial shot looking from Portsmouth out towards the Chesapeake Bay, and I wanted to show this shot just to so we could just envisage how we have been modernizing the port over the last 5 years. And in the distance on the right, Norfolk International Terminals, which I'll come back to. On the left, Virginia International Gateway. They are the two major container terminals within the port. In the front of the picture is Portsmouth Marine Terminal. In this picture, operating as a container terminal, but is now the terminal that is being switched into the offshore wind hub. So it gives a feeling that in the modernization that we've undertaken of both Virginia International Gateway and Norfolk International Terminals, that allowed the port to consolidate the business from Portsmouth Marine Terminal into those facilities and free that up for the offshore wind industry. So condition of the supply chain. I think we all know it's not good. We all know it's been on the front pages of most newspapers, and we all know if whatever we choose to do with any sort of service vendor at the moment, the first criteria they give you is subject to supply chain. So there have been significant issues, largely on the West Coast. The East Coast as a whole has had a lot of speed bumps to get through, but largely what we've seen is significant problems within California. And a lot of those, whilst they have been demonstrated by the queue of ships that's sitting outside California, is actually within North American hinterlands.
Mostly Long Beach.
Mostly Los Angeles, Long Beach is where the problem has manifested itself. But it has been a combination of transload warehouse capacity, domestic rail capacity, intermodal chassis fleet capacity, COVID labor supply, one thing on top of the other, resulting in nowhere to discharge vessels that are arriving in California. And that has caused these records that have never been seen before in terms of delays within the supply chain. And of course, that has made mainstream press. It's made the financial reports of every Fortune 100 company, and therefore it puts us as a port and puts those of us who operate in the supply chain in both an opportunity position and a risk position as a whole. In the course of the last calendar year, we've actually performed very well, and our headlines have been good headlines, and that's created a lot of good activity for us as a whole. So there is a great opportunity here for the Port of Virginia to capitalize on that performance and further grow in the future.
Senator Newman.
Let me ask a question, just backing up a little bit. I should know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why such a problem? In other words, how did we get to where we are? Just maybe 30 seconds on how did we get where we're, is there just a lack of workers? Was there pent-up demand? What's the short answer on why we are where we are?
So Chairman and Senator, to answer the question, there's no one answer, but I think the main I would take is that we do normally operate in a seasonal pattern of importing. So, as an example, patio furniture is sold in the spring. It is normally supplied into the nation in the January, February, March period for the retail season, April, May, June. Likewise, retail goods for the holiday season leading up to Black Friday. What we have seen in the course of COVID and the pandemic is the need for a lot of people to order when manufacturing is open in Asia. So manufacturing, of course, has been open, shut, depending on the location. So you've moved from just-in-time or seasonal ordering to just-in-case ordering, and therefore a very, very significant demand for warehousing. If warehousing runs out of capacity, then the process moves backwards into the ports. It is a chain, right? It's called a supply chain for that purpose. So if a warehouse is full, then the truck can't deliver the container. If that container is sitting on the street, you can't take the next container out of the port. It stays in the port. You can't discharge the ship. The ship will stay at anchor. And you do that in California, which itself has not been expanding its infrastructure maybe at the pace it needed to, or modernizing at the pace it should have. And you're running with precision railroading beyond that en route to Chicago. So a lot of these goods have been caught in that capture zone. The other one is a lot of goods, how do the goods enter the marketplace? So import goods are either going to be, if you take a automotive manufacturer, he will be bringing a full container load from his origin supplier to his manufacturing plant. It won't be disturbed in between. Someone else may consolidate their goods in Asia and say, this container is now going to Memphis. I know it's all for Memphis. The quickest way into the market, traditionally, is load it to Los Angeles and then transload it to your destination you need, whether that is Dallas, Chicago, New York, Washington. When I was learning economics in school, my economic professor, do you make ice cream in advance of the season, or do you wait till you know if strawberry or chocolate's the flavor of the season before you make it? And I think it's a little similar. So when those goods are just being surged into the country through a single gateway, it's going to collapse on that transload market. And that's what we saw happen. We on the East Coast have been more traditionally where it's been pre-consolidated in Asia, or it's coming through point to point. The big opportunity to us is to build on that transload and relocate that transload market. So if I look at volumes in the course of our volumes for last calendar year, the port as a whole was up 25% in volumes. TEUs is our measure of containers used in our industry. I think most importantly, whilst this was an import surge with 27% import increase, is we protected the export business. So the export business is up 11.6%. We were the fastest growing major port at 25%. We were the fastest growing import port and the fastest growing export port. So it's a good story for 2021. We did realize that the overwhelming import flow could harm the exporter. So we did take measures back in February last year to protect that export flow, to make sure that the agricultural exports could keep moving. And you'll see that our rail and our barge containers equally increased.
Do we close it all on Savannah?
Next slide, sir. So the answer is, in percentage terms, we outgrew Savannah, but in absolute terms, they outgrew us. So while we grew 25%, they grew 16%. We grew 700,000. In total, they grew 900,000 in total. They're starting from a larger base. So the answer is we did perform to the best of a whole. However, we have to accept that where we are in our size, we are the fifth largest port in the nation in container terms. They are the third, and therefore they started from a larger base. So we can celebrate one thing. On the other hand, we've got more to do as a whole. And in particular, their landside economic development has been ahead of ours. Their amount of square footage that's being built in the distribution industry on spec is as much as 20 to 1 in excess of ours. It's very, very considerable. But you can see overall, it's a good story on the loaded cargo moving through the ports. So as we look at opportunities and risks, some real opportunities for the Port of Virginia. This West Coast problem is not going to go away. Essentially, the operations on the West Coast, while they had congestion, and they may solve congestion, they're going to do so at a very significant operating cost, and therefore their cost of doing business is going up. There's an opportunity for us. The interest from developers, industrial developers in our market, is at an all-time high. So the communities around the port in Hampton Roads, Suffolk, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, the developer interest is really much, much higher, as we have the opportunity to build more infrastructure. We're ahead of plan for volumes, so we can seek to grow from a higher base going forward. First-in services, those services that choose to call Norfolk before they call any other port. They don't go to New York before us. They don't go to Savannah before us. They come to us directly. 4 of those are new in the course of this last year. That's an important point for that importer looking for a fast distribution. We do have risks, though. Inflation. I think we all know that for construction and transportation assets are expensive. There's significant construction cost increases. And for the Virginia International Gateway lease, we pay increases each year based off an inflation index. So our underlying lease costs are also increasing. There is significant competition, particularly from the south, for how people move their goods and how they build their distribution chains. So we do compete heavily with South Carolina, Georgia, and Baltimore with some of their redevelopments.
Stephen, does Charleston and Savannah, do they serve unique markets, or are they kind of one thing and it's just a question of price and availability of docking and what have you? 'Cause they're so close. I was just curious.
That they serve the same market. Of course, what you're really competing for is where does somebody choose to build their distribution centers. So if you think about the bigger, say the big box retailers, we have some very significant big box retailers in Virginia. We cross over in terms of trucking rates with competition with them just about at Charlotte in North Carolina. But if you think of the very southwest of Virginia, that tends to move through Charleston, Savannah, not through Norfolk, because of the trucking rates from eastern Tennessee and the southwest are better in that direction. But I think as you look at Charleston, how do we compete in the sense that we will have distributors who say, I will choose to use one site on the East Coast and distribute to 20 distribution centers from that one location. We're competing with Georgia to locate that business there or locate it here, or even for that matter in eastern Pennsylvania. So we have Savannah has an advantage of being closest to I-95. We have an advantage of a much better harbor. So you've got to take our much better harbor up against their proximity to I-95. Charleston has a better harbor than Savannah, distance from I-95. So you're playing in different people's distribution models. Some go north from us, some go south. There's no one answer to the question. You've really got to work with the client, and the way we've organized ourselves in the market is to concentrate on e-commerce, big box retail, automotive, so you understand what each person is looking to do. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the state on development sites. We don't have the land bank that the ports to the south of us have. We don't have that ready, able land bank to go turnkey quickly. And when we do have it, we are typically 18 months to 24 months to market, whereas they will be in the 12 to 14 months to market. So they can be quicker to market. And we've got both railroads operating very well, but we need to strengthen the Midwest capacity. We have had times in the course of 2021 where we have had to meter cargo moving to Chicago or Kansas City or Louisville because they're running out of capacity at the inland sites. We've had to buffer on their behalf. So looking at the terminals that were modernized from the prior investments that were made by the Commonwealth, Virginia International Gateway, which is the facility in Portsmouth, this is now a fully modernized, modern facility capable of handling 1.2 million containers, and we're operating it very, very well presently, and it is operating quite close to its design capacity. The second one is Norfolk International Terminals, which commenced operations in May of 2020. And the part of the picture nearest to us is known as South Norfolk International Terminals, which has equally been modernized from the previous investments made and is turning out to operate just as we expected, similar to Virginia International Gateways, operating very well. I will come back to the piece in the north, which is the next part we intend to modernize. Some continued investments we are making. We have ship-to-shore cranes, which are en route to us at the moment, for the 2 cranes, which are the largest cranes to handle the largest ships. They will be delivered in March. And we have shuttle trucks, which are the vehicles that deliver containers to and from those cranes, also on order to further allow us to use the capacity that we have being built from those cranes and in the containers. We are building out a central rail yard at Norfolk International Terminals, which is modernizing the rail yard on a similar way to the one operating at Virginia International Gateways. That will add 270,000 rail lift capacity to keep us ahead of the curve on our rail lift. And intermodal chassis, which are the chassis that sit underneath the containers that we all drive by on the highways, we run that chassis pool, and we've got a significant order book in place. They are in very strong demand across the nation. We are very conscious that under the Trump administration, significant tariffs were placed on the import of these. They've been maintained by the Biden administration. So we have moved ahead of most of our competition by ordering domestically to make sure that we are able to take care of the trucking business within Virginia. We have, you will be familiar, I hope, with the the channel deepening and widening, the 55-foot channel for the harbour. This is well underway with the Thimble Shoals West and the Thimble Shoals East business already contracted and the Thimble Shoals West largely complete. Under the infrastructure bill, we have been provided funding for the Norfolk Harbour Channel. That is $17 million of federal money, where Senator Warner in particular was helpful to us as a whole. This project will complete to allow navigation at either the very end of 2024 or very early in 2025. From a timing perspective, as this channel will allow not only the deepest, largest ships, but also two-way transits of the ships. From a timing perspective, it's also timed to be similar to the second Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. It's also timed for when our central rail yard will be complete. So from an overall timing perspective, there's a lot of core infrastructure being delivered end of 2024, early 2025. Just to touch on the offshore wind hub, and I appreciate a lot of work was done in the Senate regarding the offshore wind industry as a whole. We have 3 tenants that we have leased out the Portsmouth for the offshore wind. Dominion Energy has 70 acres on the waterside of the facility. This is where they will receive the large components, the turbines that are going to come in to supply the offshore wind, and they will use this area to transfer to the installation vessels, which will then go off Virginia Beach to install the wind turbines. Siemens Gamesa, SGRE as it's shown on the map, is where the wind blade finishing plant will be built. So wind blades will be imported over the berth, transferred to this facility for finishing, and then transferred out through the Dominion property to the installation. And Ørsted is also a Danish group, which is also involved not only in the coastal Virginia offshore wind facility, but also a number of the others, Maryland and potentially North Carolina. So coming back to what's in our budget and why it's there, this graph, or the series of graphs, is really just to give a view of our capacity and our volumes. Our capacity is shown by the teal, the blue. The bars are our volume growth, our projected volume growth, the utilization, and the grey shows the need for future capacity, which we intend to fulfill by developing northern Norfolk International Terminals, which is the next slide, and this is in particular what is in the budget. North NIT is the right-hand side of this picture. It is the part of the container terminals, existing container terminals, still to be modernized, and it's about a $650 million total project to fulfill it. The funding for which $266 million is in the budget ask that we have in front of you and the House presently. The benefits of this are about, as we take them forward, would be a significant benefit to Virginia as a whole. And we believe that with what we have built today, so far, at Virginia International Gateways and Norfolk International Terminals, that we are building the most modern and competitive port on the East Coast. A quick note just to cover how the port is, how the statewide investments have come in the last 5 years. The port has been helpful or instrumental to a number of investments that we believe have created about 27,000 real jobs within the state as a whole. My final slide is we have just recently updated with William and Mary the economic impact on the Commonwealth of the port as a whole. I think most interestingly for this is all of these increases that are referenced are compared to 2018, fiscal year 2018. But in fiscal year 21, I think the overwhelming message we got from this study is that when you looked at the pandemic, is the port or transportation as a whole, as a sector, was a very stabilizing sector to the Commonwealth. It is the one of, I think, only two sectors where jobs have actually grown since the start of the pandemic. And we, when you think of the other sectors, with it particularly perhaps to Hampton Roads that suffered, the tourist leisure industries, we were able to increase our impact during that period. So this impact is good. I think it'll be even better when we come to look at fiscal year 22, given the amount of growth that we were able to achieve in that year. And with that, Chairman, I'll just conclude my remarks.
Good. Thank you. Any questions? What would I know we are. Excuse me. I know we're somewhat disadvantaged in terms of. I think we have one inland port in Front Royal. I think Georgia has several. Is that holding us back? I know there's one being proposed this year. Tell us a little bit about inland ports and how they may be of help to you.
So from an inland perspective, we currently operate two facilities, Richmond Marine Terminal with a barge connecting service and Front Royal with the rail connecting service. The reason really for an inland port it is one of three reasons. Can we reduce the truck pricing? Can we get rail beneath truck pricing to be more competitive to and from the port? Mm-hmm. Can we identify a large importer or exporter who will be the beneficiary of that? Or can we find a location which we can then use as an economic development engine to create industry? I think as we think through those, so therefore the further the distance, the more competitive you can be with truck. So from the far southwest perspective, there may be an opportunity from the far southwest, not least of which is rail is moving through there anyway. The Louisville trains, which we run each and every day, are going through Bristol, for example.
Is that the Heartland Corridor?
That is the Heartland Corridor. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity, therefore, is to attack Eastern Tennessee or provide an opportunity in Southwest Virginia. The piece, particular to Senator Newman's district as a whole, there are some short line railroads there that are quite keen to do something. What we have not yet identified, and which I think there's a proposal, I believe, to undertake a study to look at the feasibility, is there a core business there that could be the anchor to which we can actually grow from? And I think that's the piece we'd have to identify, Chairman, is say, what is that core business, and can we provide a transportation cost to them that is beneficial, that is at an advantage to trucking?
Mm-hmm. I remember years ago when they were talking about the Heartland Corridor and getting them to be double stack, is that the advantage was going to be the Midwest market, that we could move more into the Chicago, if you will, part of the world, that part of the Midwest. Has that come to fruition?
So in particular for our rail growth this year, most of that rail growth has been Chicago or Columbus. So when you think, the short answer to the question is yes. Without it, we'd be at a significant disadvantage. We've managed to create quite an opportunity from it. Our rail volumes as a whole have been are just below the Port of New York. And when you think that the majority of our ocean services, we are behind New York on the rotation, we are improving. I do think at the moment we will see certain rail volumes, believe it or not, from Asia to Norfolk to the Ohio Valley as opposed to through the West Coast, simply because we can get it there quicker. So the opportunity for both Columbus, Chicago, had we had more capacity in Chicago this year, we would have carried more freight.
What would you say if you had to choose some road or rail projects that we could undertake that would improve your efficiency and drive prices down and what have you? What would that be?
So I think from a road ask, Chairman, I think from a road ask finishing 64, so the widening on the peninsula, we are very conscious of 58, 460. We believe there will be significant distribution capacity built on that Suffolk Isle of Wight corridor of 460. And that doesn't fall into the standard model because it would be expansion growth as opposed to existing traffic. Those would be the two corridors that we would look to. From a rail perspective, as we build our further rail capacity, then how we manage both railroads operating in Norfolk International Terminals and how we build bigger rail routes in the local Hampton Roads district. It's not necessarily trunk line capacity, it's more that local capacity, and we have ideas on how we could do that.
Is your difficulty more north-south or east-west?
From a road perspective, it's getting to I-95. So it's from the coast to I-95 is our primary road issue as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Steve, any?
Just, Mr. Chairman, I guess you know your staff's talked to us about amending our inland port to include Bristol, and that's fine with us. I think studying both, and whichever, or both, that makes sense, is what we want to do.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for your good work. We appreciate it. All right. Next on the agenda, we're going to discuss the Virginia Multi-Use Trails Initiative. David Jackson, Principal Integrated Planning and Policy from Cambridge Systematics, Inc. Yes. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Afternoon, Mr. Chair and Senator. Great to be with you today. So Jason invited me today to speak to you about the Multi-Use Trails Initiative, effort that our firm helped the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment within the Transportation Secretariat initiate last summer. So what I'll do today is talk to you a little bit about what we learned through this process and how it may lead to some recommendations moving forward regarding the funding and planning and prioritization of multi-use trails in the Commonwealth. So as a reminder, the 2021 Appropriations Act directed OIPI to coordinate a policy working group. The policy working group included these members, as well as Mr. Powell from this committee and Mr. Jay from House Appropriations. We met with this group 4 different times over the length of this effort and reached some critical conclusions that I'll talk to you about today. So as a reminder, the initiative requested 3 topics to be investigated. Looking into a prioritization process for the identification of new multi-use trail opportunities, master planning for multi-use trails, and a funding needs assessment. So our process with this working group looked into those 3 questions critically, and OIPI engaged our firm as well as working with a number of stakeholders both within the Commonwealth and outside the Commonwealth, including 2 leading peer multi-use trail states, Virginia and Pennsylvania, as well as some national groups and regional groups in the Commonwealth. By meeting with these folks and learning information and needs regarding multi-use trails in the Commonwealth, we reached a conclusion early on that what we needed to do first. Pause for a moment.
All right. Welcome, Senator Saslaw.
Good afternoon, sir.
We're just getting into our multimodal trail presentation.
Downstairs, I'll have to go down and back down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please, continue.
So we reached a conclusion early on that we needed to first define, obviously, what we were studying. So we looked at a definition of multi-use trail. The Appropriations Act did not specify a definition for these facilities. So we reached consensus on three critical components of what a trail, multi-use trail should be. They should first serve non-motorized users. They should second predominantly exist in their own right-of-way. So this could be a utility corridor or a former rail line. We've seen a lot of rail-to-trail conversions successfully in the Commonwealth in recent years. Or located within a roadway right-of-way. And that could be alongside a road or within the actual roadway itself, as long as it's separated from vehicle traffic. And then the third point of this multi-use trails definition is with regard to the surface and accessibility. So VDOT has specific definitions regarding what constitutes a shared use path. That are paths that are hard surface, compressed stone, asphalt, or concrete, with minimum grades and a minimum width for safe two-way operation. So by gathering this consensus with the group first, we were able to continue the study and remind ourselves that there are a wealth of these types of facilities already within the Commonwealth. All three of these pictures depict trails that support non-motorized use. They operate within their own right-of-way, even on-road, as in that Franklin Street example here in Richmond. And they meet those accessibility standards of safe two-way use. They can also have multiple surface types as long as it's a compressed hard surface. The Virginia Creeper Trail, for example, in Washington County is a good example of one. It is a hard-packed surface and fine gravel, but is still accessible to different users and different types of conveyances.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Newman.
when we went down this path, one of the concerns we had is that there would be some preference given to people who are commuting to and from work or something like that. I don't see that here. Does that mean that that is not considered to be a preference? In other words, if you're recreational biking versus getting somewhere, did that figure into the study? Some of us were concerned that it would, but it doesn't seem like it has.
We decided early on it needed to be very balanced, so that we wanted to use the term multi-use to reflect the idea that it's truly both transportation and recreation. I think particularly on the recreation side, an acknowledgement that the non-urban areas of the state where commuting is not a necessity on these types of systems, trails have that create that opportunity for economic development, public health, and so forth.
Thank you.
Senator Newman, we just got some good news with the in Northern Virginia with the next project, which is the extension of the express lanes to the American Legion Bridge, which Maryland, as part of their expansion, will replace. For whatever reason, they were resisting. The Park Authority was not allowing a connection to the C&O Canal Trail, which would have helped with commuting. And they were instead sending you across the river and up into the interior to hook up to a road there, and then having to double back to get to the C&O Canal Trail. And apparently that decision, I had talked to Mr. Strickler, has been reversed from what I understand, and which is a good thing. And their logic was that too many people would use it and it would cause maintenance problems. So that was a little strange, but at any rate, that was good news for the people from the McLean, Great Falls, Tyson's Corner area being able to commute to Washington, D.C.
So what we then did in this effort is do some background research. So we reached three conclusions in this research that I'll share with you now. So the first key point, and I think all of us in the room understand this, that there is no single agency that oversees or manages trails within the Commonwealth. This is not unique to Virginia, but we have seen in some of those leading states, Florida and Pennsylvania, for example, there is more authority vested in a single agency to do this. So VDOT obviously manages a large network of shared use paths, which are the most similar facility to these multi-use trails we're discussing today. VDOT and DCR each own and maintain different trails that have unique responsibilities and policies, but they also overlap in some of those management efforts. DRPT does not fund our own trails, but they certainly help coordinate with railroads on rail-to-trail projects. It's also important to know, and this is somewhat unique in the Virginia case, is that regional organizations and local governments have been very successful in delivering, maintaining, and marketing multi-use trails across the Commonwealth. The Capital Trails Coalition in Northern Virginia, Roanoke Valley Greenway Commission, and the Roanoke region are great examples of this, and work with nonprofits to market and maintain trails. Those agencies, in addition to counties, cities, towns, manage over 900 miles of shared use paths across the Commonwealth. So they have a significant stake in the outcomes of this effort as well. So this map depicts VDOT's existing statewide bicycle facility inventory. It tracks information on over 1,300 miles of shared use paths and the 3 designated U.S. bike routes in Virginia. This map is important for a couple of reasons, and VDOT is continuously improving it. It helps view the scope of the current statewide multi-use trail system, and it also reflects that different ownership among those many entities I noted earlier. For example, the High Bridge Trail in Cumberland, Nottoway, and Prince Edward counties, it's within a state park. It's managed by DCR. It can facilitate both recreational and transportation purposes. One of those great trails that serve multiple users. As a reminder, the focus on multi-use excluded trails that are single-use from this activity, so like the Appalachian Trail or those other single-use trails in the Commonwealth, whether it's for kayaking, hiking, or mountain biking, were not included in this particular effort. We've also noted on this map those 3 critical regional trails that are undergoing current conversations and planning and implementation on the Eastern Shore, Shenandoah Valley, and the Fall Line. So we also spent a lot of time looking into trail funding. Another key takeaway from the assessment is that VDOT and DCR fund trails through a diversity of federal and state programs. However, these funding sources are not uniquely designed only for multi-use trail investment. So multi-use trails are competing against a number of other multimodal transportation purposes, as well as different recreational investment purposes. For example, within VDOT's purview, trails are one component of the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program. Trails also obviously compete against multimodal investments in smart scale, and for DCR, their 2 primary programs, recreational trails and land and water conservation, fund a number of different recreational activities. It's also very important to note that smart scale has led to some great opportunities for multi-use trails in the Commonwealth, and they have competed successfully through the first 4 rounds to a total of over $348 million in funding for unique trail-only projects. And that doesn't account for trails that are components of larger multimodal transportation projects, like the 495 Next project you mentioned. So in conclusion on the assessment findings, 4 key outcomes, and through those meetings with the working group and the State Trails Advisory Committee, that lack of a single agency oversight, which also leads to missing a single vision or structure of a comprehensive statewide plan or policy for multi-use trails. No sustained, standalone, unique trail funding source for multi-use trails. We view this as constraining the full implementation potential and leading to missed opportunities, particularly the opportunities created through partnerships with localities, federal partners, and private entities that have fostered trail development in a number of places across the country. We also know that longer regional trails are very challenging to fund and even more challenging in some cases to implement, given that multi-jurisdictional coordination and high right-of-way costs to acquire. We also view these trails as hard to quantify the benefits. We know that the economic benefits of these particular trails, like the Creeper Trail mentioned earlier, can be significant to those rural economies. As noted earlier, also, there's no real single system of understanding needs current trails, trails being programmed and constructed across the Commonwealth that can help planners decide where to place funding and where to invest resources in trail planning.
Mr. Chairman, can you condemn for trails?
Excuse me?
Can you condemn for trails?
I believe so, yes. Now our study did not look into those specific details, but I think regarding right-of-way acquisition approaches.
Senator Newman, I've been working, Jason's been involved in it, trying to complete a trail with 2 gaps in it to connect basically the next project on the Beltway to Loudoun County all the way out to Purcellville, but we've got a 0.3 of a mile problem with needing a right-of-way from the Madeira School, and they're not willing to do that. So we're trying to create some inducements for them by realigning a road right across from them that has created a transportation hazard. And then we finally have to deal with the fact as to whether the Great Falls Park for the National Park Service will allow, ultimately, under this new administration, for bicycles to transit their way across the park, which would require us to build a bridge over Difficult Run and connect up to the trails on the Fairfax-Loudoun County side, on the other side of the trail. Very complicated project, and I'm glad to have your contact information for advice, but a lot of these things are just so complicated to try to put together. So, at any rate, please, go on.
Thank you, sir. So there were 3 primary implementation actions within the recommendations. The first action was to establish a state multi-use trails office. The idea behind this particular recommendation, as well as a state multi-use trails plan and a state multi-use trails program, is first, these 3 recommendations span the legislative request focus areas and help enhance the process for multi-use trail projects to advance from needs identification through planning, through project development, to competing for funding, and then ultimately to implementation and ongoing maintenance. Collectively, as the graphic indicates, these recommendations target that approach of developing a world-class statewide trail system here in the Commonwealth. Also, as noted, all of the recommendations and funding amounts within the report are in addition to the existing funding programs noted previously. They acknowledge the opportunities created by the 2 budget amendments, SB 29 and 30. They also acknowledge, and this is really important, the potential created by the new funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law, noting that the recommendations in this work are a value add to position Virginia to better leverage those new federal opportunities. So I'll walk quickly through each of the recommendations in a little bit more detail. So first of all, the State Multi-Use Trails Office addresses that assessment finding of lack of a single agency with oversight and resources. The office would develop the state trails plan by working with VDOT, DCR, and other stakeholders. It would manage the state trails program, being in a position to establish strategic direction, develop implementation policy, leverage resources, co-market multi-use trails with private and nonprofits, and report on progress to the General Assembly and to important stakeholders. The recommendation is for the General Assembly to set aside funding for the Multi-Use Trails Office as soon as possible. It's also important to note, and we noted this in the report as well, that the Commonwealth Transportation Board during the January workshop recommended that the office be located within the Transportation Secretariat to help ensure that better alignment of planning and engineering expertise with the majority of funding that supports trails.
Makes sense.
So the second recommendation is with regard to the state.
Senator Newman.
That seems like that's a pretty important one. What are we doing to do that? In other words, is there a budget amendment? Is there something that actually sets up within the Department of Transportation this, or there are decisions to be made? But you don't get to the rest unless you figure that out, governance, right? David, did you want to answer?
Yes, happy to. I would agree. I mean, I think we agree that to do a plan and to institute a program, you need a leading office with resources dedicated that implement it. We do.
Let me
Yes.
elaborate. The introduced budget did not establish an office. The introduced budget did provide funding for 3 long-distance multi-use trail initiatives, full funding for the Fall Line, for the Shenandoah Valley Rail Trail, and for the Eastern Shore. It sort of left the decision here in the General Assembly as to where you would put an office. The introduced budget also included funding in the Secretary of Commerce and Trade for an outdoor rec coordinator. It was a role that the former Deputy Secretary was playing. So there were resources that were put in place that could be repurposed to focus an effort on the creation of the office. I think the report goes a long way towards a solid recommendation that it should live in transportation because it has access to things such as the Transportation Alternatives funding if you wanted to create a ongoing and stable trails program. And then it left you some money to do some major initiatives and maybe a generational investment.
Senator Newman.
Well, it just seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that we should put it in our list of things in this subcommittee to think about pumping out of here is something in the budget that makes a decision and gives a leadership. Because if you don't have leadership, the rest of it will fall. And if this is where we're going, we should consider taking it up. So
I agree, and I think VDOT is the correct choice from the standpoint of there's a lot of engineering kinds of considerations, and the trails are always going to run beside, over, under roads, and what have you. VDOT will have a huge interest in that, and I guess DCR will always play some kind of an advisory role to that, and maybe have a designated representative, or a designated person within that management group to deal with the DCR kinds of recreational issues, so that it's not doesn't just become a transportation thing, but a balanced effort, but housed in transportation. Okay.
Yes, sir. I'll also note that the report talks a lot about the existing role of the State Trails Advisory Committee, which obviously has played an important role on advising both transportation and recreation issues regarding trails. So possibly elevating the role of that existing legislatively developed committee could be an important part of this process. So with regard to the state multi-use trails plan, the importance of the plan is not only to develop that unified vision and goals for multi-use trails, it's also to help define the system, clarify those agency and partner roles, create consistent standards for these trails. Many of those standards will be similar to VDOT's existing standards for shared use paths, and also establish a process to understand, prioritize needs and investments, engage stakeholders in the public as well. So the report recognizes that the multi-use trails plan also needs to work with existing planning processes codified in law, such as the Virginia Outdoors Plan, which is led by DCR, which talks quite a bit about recreational trails as well as trails for transportation purposes, and then as well as VTrans, which is the Commonwealth's statewide transportation plan. And then the third recommendation, implementing the state multi-use trails program. This recommendation was made in recognition that without that standalone recurring funding source for trails, it would limit Virginia's ability to leverage existing and future funding sources. So by instituting this program, Virginia would be able to develop and implement a grant strategy to support resource-constrained partners, particularly localities, and when available, distribute new state funding. An important part of this is that this trails program would not, and this is important, not overwrite existing funding programs managed by VDOT or DCR, but instead look to leverage existing and potential new funding resources to maximize the ability of these trail projects to be funded through existing transportation and recreational funding programs. So the State Trails program is designed in this report, sets aside initially $20 million annually to implement 3 grant programs. A planning grant program, which would develop planning and concept development studies to help counties, towns, and cities scope solutions and prepare to compete for funding. A construction grant program, which would lead to construction grants supporting construction of critical high priority segments of trails, which would help with those projects particularly where closing a critical gap is a barrier to implementation. And then last but certainly not least, and something that the group began to recognize as critically important, is maintenance. Allow an annual allocation to a maintenance fund that supports maintenance activities on existing trails, particularly focusing on capital maintenance activities to ensure access to these trails are remained and they remain a high quality system. We also acknowledge that all of these funding requests should increase annually consistent with inflation or some other index to reflect the pressures of building these trails.
With regard to maintenance, a lot of the bicycle organizations, clubs, have expressed interest in, they'll help you build a trail, they'll help maintain that kind of thing. Is that part of your structure that you want to set up, that
Yes.
they would be part of that?
Yes, sir. So the report does acknowledge that those nonprofits are really important partners in this and should continue to be. But it also recognizes that given the expansion that we're going to see in these trails, we have almost 140 miles planned in those 3 trails that I mentioned earlier. There will need to be a commitment moving forward by the Commonwealth to maintain these assets as well, given how significant the system is going to expand.
Is that done through like MOUs with these groups? Is that the primary vehicle by which you would make an arrangement for them to be responsible for maintaining a certain part of the system?
Yes, sir. MOUs are one technique. In a number of other states we talk to, where there are standards for MOUs between these groups, so there's an understanding and accountability for maintenance.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir. So to conclude the presentation now, some considerations obviously as this report was finalized in December and posted to the General Assembly report system in January. New initiatives announced as the report was finalized represent that surge in federal, state, and local funding opportunities and partnerships to implement multi-use trails in the Commonwealth. We view these initiatives as creating an opportunity to launch immediate priorities, to build a network, and then obviously catalyze that longer-term planning, development, and maintenance. This includes the Commonwealth Transportation Board's action in December to commit an additional over $42 million from the Priority Transportation Fund to the Fall Line Trail, in addition to an important matching contribution from the Central Virginia Transportation Authority of over $100 million and over $70 million from Smart Scale. We also know that the new bipartisan infrastructure law, or the IIJA, creates many new formula and discretionary grant opportunities for multi-use trails, including an estimated additional $44 million in CTB controlled funding over the next 6-year program through transportation alternatives. So the opportunities created by the bipartisan bill create another critical need for establishing these Commonwealth-led programs to leverage those resources. And that concludes my remarks today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Question, does, in terms of, we have the recreational and then, the more commuting kinds of trails and what have you, is there any science that exists, a sort of a smart scale for bike projects, if you will, not just the one that we do for VDOT. I mean, do we stress connecting trail projects that connect trails? I mean, what is there a metrics that is in use that you can help make those decisions?
Absolutely. So there are some best practices. We referenced the work in Pennsylvania and Florida. There are other states like Oregon that are leading trail states that have prioritization processes for trails. I will say that those processes often find a way to balance recreation and transportation by finding a way to measure that economic and public health impact of trail investments at the same time that they're measuring the potential use for transportation purposes and the opportunity to reduce commuting commuting by vehicles and emissions and so
And that those systems are transferable to what we would do with this new office?
They absolutely could be. Yes, sir.
Very nice. Senator Newman.
It's an odd question, but have you talked to the House Transportation Subcommittee of Appropriations yet, or do you plan to, or is that in the works? Do you know?
I have not spoken, and I'm not sure if it's in the works, but
So-
we'd be happy to.
Chairman, I know that staff does a good job, but it makes sense that we need to do something on this, not just look at it, right? And so it'd be helpful, I think, if they were up to speed, because if not, you end up in conference and they're on Mars and we're on Venus, you know? And so it just seems like that if staffs could coordinate that visit, or if you guys could reach out, it would maybe help us.
Senator Saslow, any comments, questions?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Hundreds of miles.
Yeah.
Many trails in northern Virginia.
It is, well, everything is, more in the, the Arlington, Maryland area. Well, we do have the 66 trail that connects up to the W&OD, and
That's the WNOD.
yeah, and the trail down to Mount Vernon, the
One that runs along the George Washington Parkway.
yeah, and the Purple Line that was going to be done in Maryland, has that taken that trail out of play? Or?
I can't speak for that project. I know it's been delayed significantly, but I do believe they were looking for opportunities to maintain that
Yeah.
trail component.
Because one of the key things is making sure that the planning with DC and Maryland is such that we have that kind of interconnectivity. We need to do a better job of being a region as opposed to three separate entities all coming up with their own ideas. And it was just great news that they're going to allow us to hook up to the C&O Canal Trail from the next project, even though that's going to take a while to get that up and going, but at least it's those express lanes are going to be built, and we will get a new American Legion bridge, which will have a multimodal aspect to it to connect up to the next project in Virginia. And I think one of the hardest ones is, how do you get from DC to the Richmond area? Not so easy there. There's still a lot of work to be done. But I really appreciate your being here today. And Senator Newman?
Before you leave, I do know you brought a lot of friends with us, and it's kind of nice to have a room full of trail enthusiasts. And I know that we have here, I know Champ's here, but also Eastern Shore Trail, Rail Trail Foundation. Is it the Dahlgren, Heritage Trail Association, Shenandoah Rail Trail Exploration Partnership. Just great to have a bunch of people that also are passionate about trails. I don't know if they follow you around or what, but you brought in a great crowd, so thank
Sure, I'll
you.
get to know them.
Well, they are passionate and always looking to provide information and solutions to things. But I think the idea of just putting it all together into one group who can envision what the state ought to look like and assist people like me who are trying to figure out a very complex trail connection in that I don't know how much of it is going to be for the commuting and for recreation and just a little bit of both, and also trying to deal with the different park authorities and the National Park Service, which is tough. Those guys, they have ideas about how their property is going to be used, and they don't like a whole lot of outside suggestions. But we all have to pull together: feds, states, localities. And I really appreciate your being here today, and for everyone who has taken their time to come to this briefing today. Is there any comment, since we have a little time here, any comment from the audience or anyone about anything you've heard today that's of interest or you have a contribution to make? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for So,
Hi, give us your name and
Yeah, my name's Francie Wayland.
get into the
Thanks.
microphone.
My name's Francie Wayland. I'm from the Eastern Shore Rail Trail Foundation. And, you know, Senator, you were talking about how complicated that your trail is, where our trail isn't. It's on a coastal plain. It's just on an old rail bed. We've already pulled up the stakes and the ties, and we still can't build our trail because funding is so hard to find. It's difficult for stakeholders like us to get in touch with the right people to get some direction on how to build the trail. So this is absolutely the right way to go, to build a trail office, and we really appreciate that.
We appreciate that. Yeah, it is. It is. You know, you have to start with people who care about it and have it in a place where they've got the assistance that they need. And I think VDOT is the right,
Yeah.
you know, is the right
We
the
agree.
right place. And so thank you for your.
Thank you so much.
All right,
Thanks for
appreciate
doing
it. Anyone else like to step up to the mic? Yes, ma'am.
I'll be brief because I know it's a little past 5. So my name's Kat Anthony. I'm the executive director of the Virginia Capitol Trail Foundation,
I
also the
remember Kat.
president of the Virginia Trails Alliance. So Office of Trails is very much needed in Virginia. Very much would support this. It's the Capitol Trails, you know, 1.2 million trail counts last year, over 1 million. And so this funding is needed. This Office of Trails is needed. So I hope y'all will support this. We need a statewide trail. We need to connect different trails, and so I hope y'all will support this.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've actually done events from the Jamestown Center to Richmond to garner resources for certain activities, and it's just fabulous to have the Capital to Capital Trail, and you know the world is a changing place, and if we don't make plans for these things now, they just get more and more difficult to figure out as we go. So there's no better time to start than the present. And so with that, committee's adjourned.